It didn't happen with a speech. It happened with a silent instruction. One moment, Camilla's access is assumed routine, unquestioned, almost automatic. The next, a private door doesn't open. A staff member hesitates, and a single line of protocol changes everything. Not today. That's how the palace breaks people without making a sound. And when word spreads that King Charles has ended Camilla's access to the Queen's personal art collection, the real panic isn't the why, it's the who pushed him there. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. In this dramatized palace account, the Queen's personal art collection isn't treated like decor, it's treated like a private language only a few were ever allowed to speak. It's sacred in the way grief can be sacred. It's personal in the way love letters are personal. It's legacy coded in the most dangerous sense, because every piece inside it carries a quiet message about who belonged close enough to the late Queen to understand her inner world. That's why the access cut hits like a shockwave. Not a polite request. Not a gentle "let's review this." An immediate operational change that lands with the bluntness of a slammed door, one that doesn't echo outward, but shakes the building from the inside. The staff member at the threshold doesn't raise their voice. They don't explain. They simply hesitate. And in the palace, hesitation is a siren. It tells everyone something has shifted without saying what it is. A glance is exchanged. A breath is held. The words are small, almost apologetic, yet they carry the weight of authority. Not today. And suddenly, Camilla isn't just delayed, she is reclassified. That's the humiliation the palace specializes in. It doesn't shout at you. It quietly changes your status and waits for you to notice. Camilla feels it in the stillness around her, in the way aides become careful with pronouns, in the way a normal routine turns into an awkward pause that no one dares to fill. Then the whispers begin soft at first, then sharper, as if fear gives them an edge. The collection is emotionally loaded for a reason. It isn't about paintings. It's about permission. It's about proximity. It's about who is allowed to stand in the late Queen's private orbit without being accused of claiming it. And now, in a single move, King Charles has drawn a boundary so precise it feels surgical. The palace doesn't do that unless it believes something is at risk. Reputation, legacy, stability, pick your poison. But the real tremor comes from the name attached to the spark, Princess Anne. Because when Anne objects, it is never casual. It is never random. It is duty, sharpened into action, and it turns whispers into decisions that can't be undone. Camilla's shock is not theatrical. It's controlled, because she understands exactly what this moment implies. Being blocked hurts. Being blocked by the system is worse. The deeper motive begins to leak through the cracks. This isn't simply about access. It's about control, about who has the right to curate the Queen's memory, to touch the spaces that were never meant to become political symbols. In the palace, legacy is a resource everyone wants, but no one admits they're fighting for. And the art collection, private, personal, guarded, sits at the center of that unspoken war. If Camilla is seen as stepping too far into that world, it suggests a claim. If Charles allows it, it suggests endorsement. And Anne, in this story, refuses to let the late Queen's private refuge become anyone else's crown. That's why the most chilling detail isn't the locked door. It's what people quietly suspect exists behind it, a sealed directive. Something written, something filed, something prepared with the kind of foresight that proves this outcome wasn't drafted in a rush of emotion. Because the palace doesn't move this cleanly on impulse. It moves cleanly when the decision has been sitting in a drawer, waiting for the moment it can be justified. And as Camilla realizes this may have been planned long before today, the fear shifts from embarrassment to something darker, because if a directive exists, it means someone has been watching, tracking, documenting, and building a case. Because when the palace moves this fast, it means the decision was already waiting, just looking for the right trigger. Anne doesn't fight like a headline. she fights like a verdict. No theatrics, no emotional performance, just blunt authority and a sense of duty that doesn't bend for anyone, not even queens. Her objection isn't framed as rivalry, it's framed as protection. She sees the Queen's personal art collection as memory made physical, too intimate to become a symbol in someone else's power story. And once Anne decides the line has been crossed, she doesn't debate it. She enforces it. In this dramatized palace storm, Anne's method is simple, almost ruthless in its clarity. She never argues from feelings, because feelings can be dismissed. She argues from integrity, because integrity forces people to answer. She doesn't say, "This hurts." She says, "This is wrong." And when Anne says something is wrong, she isn't offering an opinion, she's pointing to a standard the institution has lived under for decades. That's why her restraint is so intimidating. She doesn't threaten, she doesn't plead. She presents the palace with a choice: uphold the rules, or admit the rules were always optional for the powerful. Her emotional stake is deeper than anyone wants to acknowledge out loud. Because the Queen's personal art collection, in this story, isn't just a set of paintings tucked away behind polite curtains. It's the late Queen's private refuge where she could breathe without performing, a place of solitude, memory, and quiet control. Anne knows that kind of refuge doesn't survive if it becomes accessible by assumption. The moment it's treated like a shared asset, it stops being private. And once privacy dies inside the palace, something else dies with it: trust. Anne isn't guarding art. She's guarding the last untouched corner of the Queen's inner world. That's why the trigger doesn't have to be dramatic to be explosive. It could be a requested viewing that sounded harmless on paper. It could be a relocation request disguised as preservation. It could even be a rumored curation plan language that implies ownership without ever saying the word. In the palace, the most dangerous moves are the ones made through aids and schedules, because they look like routine until you realize what they actually claim. Anne hears the details and immediately understands the stakes, not because she's suspicious by nature, but because she's fluent in how power hides inside polite requests. And then the staff whispers begin, and they don't sound like gossip. They sound like history remembering itself. Anne only objects publicly when she has proof privately. That line spreads through corridors for a reason. It suggests she didn't wake up and decide to pick a fight. It suggests she has already seen something: an irregular note, an overconfident instruction, a conversation that crossed a boundary too casually. Staff who have served the Queen's memory like a sacred duty begin to shift toward Anne instinctively, because she speaks the language they trust, the old rules, the quiet standards, the unwritten ethics that kept certain things protected even when everything else became political. Anne's support network is not loud, but it is powerful. Long-serving staff who remember how the Queen wanted things handled. Legacy guardians who have protected private spaces for years without ever needing attention. People who know the difference between official access and assumed privilege. And when those people quietly align behind Anne, it creates a weight no one can ignore, not even Charles. Because it isn't a family squabble anymore. It's the institutional memory rising up like a wall. Anne doesn't storm into rooms. She moves like a document being filed. She makes calls that don't sound emotional but land like consequences. She asks questions that don't accuse, but demand answers. Who approved it? Who arranged it? Who believed they had the right? And then she invokes a specific private standard tied to the Queen's wishes, fictional but devastating in its effect. A standard that implies the Queen herself drew a line around that collection. A standard that suggests access was never meant to be inherited like a title. In that moment, Camilla's position becomes dangerously exposed, not because Anne wants humiliation, but because Anne wants boundaries. And boundaries, once named, create enemies. The palace can tolerate tension. It can tolerate whispers. But it cannot tolerate the late Queen's wishes being cited like a rule book and ignored without consequence. Anne knows that. That's why she chooses those words so carefully. She isn't just objecting, she's forcing the institution to pick a side. And once the late Queen's wishes are invoked, the argument stops being personal and becomes constitutional inside the family. Some art hangs for decoration. This art hangs for confession. The Queen's personal collection isn't a gallery, it's a private world, pieces chosen for comfort, grief, solitude, and strength. The palace treats it differently because it means differently. And that's what makes this scandal so explosive. Access to the collection isn't about taste. It's about intimacy. It's about who gets to stand inside the Queen's inner life and who is only allowed to admire her legacy from the outside. In this dramatized telling, every canvas in that collection carries a quiet fingerprint of the late Queen's inner life. Not the public role, the private person. The parts of her that never made it into speeches, never appeared in photographs, never became safe for public consumption. That's why the palace guards it with a different kind of seriousness, because it isn't valuable in the normal sense. It's legacy-coded. Identity, memory, private symbolism. And inside royal culture, private symbolism becomes a form of authority. Objects become permission slips. Rooms become proof. Access becomes a silent endorsement that says, "You belong here. You are trusted here. You are part of the story the Queen wrote for herself when no one was watching." Which is exactly why optics twist everything into danger. A simple viewing becomes a statement. A harmless request becomes entitlement. Even the suggestion of rearrangement can feel like rewriting history, deciding which pieces matter, which emotions are displayed, which memories are allowed to breathe. And once that interpretation takes hold, the palace begins to split into factions without anyone ever admitting it. Some see access as a rightful extension of status. Others see it as a violation of something sacred. And in the middle of it all, the memory war intensifies. Who gets to embody the late Queen's legacy now? And who is merely permitted to inherit the duties without inheriting the intimacy? That war is what makes misinterpretations so lethal. Staff read access as power because they've watched power operate through doors for years. Family members read it as hierarchy because hierarchy is the palace's native language. And the press, in this world, reads it as narrative: who is rising, who is being contained, who is being quietly removed from the inner sanctum. The collection becomes a mirror everyone stares into, each person seeing a different truth, each truth sparking a different fear. And then, like all palace storms, it starts politely. A request, a schedule, a small arrangement made through aides, dressed in courtesy. The kind of request that looks innocent on paper: private viewing, subtle restoration consult, a gentle curation suggestion to ensure the Queen's pieces are preserved properly. Camilla's instinct is immediate and practiced. Normalize it, wrap it in respect, make it sound routine. In her mind, courtesy is protection. If she speaks softly enough, it can't be accused of overreach. If she frames it as honoring the Queen, how could anyone call it entitlement? But courtesy can't hide the claim underneath. Someone pauses. Someone asks the question that turns velvet into steel. Who approved this? And suddenly the request feels loaded, not because the words change, but because the meaning snaps into focus. In the palace, you don't request access to private collections unless you believe you have a right to them. That's the unspoken rule everyone pretends doesn't exist until the moment it becomes undeniable. Anne hears the details and goes cold, not loud, not dramatic, but cold in the way a person goes cold when they recognize a boundary being tested. Charles hears Anne's tone and goes quiet, because he knows exactly what that tone signals. This is no longer about preference, it's about principle. Staff feel the pressure immediately, caught between senior figures like fragile glass. No one wants to be the messenger. No one wants to be the witness. Because being the person who heard the request can turn you into a pawn in a battle that will outlive your career. And just as everyone tries to keep the conversation contained, A third presence catches enough to raise the stakes, someone important enough that the matter can't be smoothed over with a polite smile and a change of subject. When powerful ears hear fragments, fragments become conclusions, and conclusions become decisions. Then comes the warning that changes the atmosphere from tense to terrifying. Anne doesn't rant. She doesn't accuse. She issues a line like a law. If Charles allows this, it changes the institution's moral line. Not a personal line, a moral one. The kind that can't be walked back without consequences. And in that single statement, the request becomes a test of reign because it forces Charles to choose what he will protect, comfort, or legacy. In the palace, those choices are never clean. They are always costly. And when Anne frames it that way, the room doesn't need shouting to feel like it's on fire. And if one painting can cause this much fear, then what's hidden in the collection isn't just beauty, it's leverage. Because once Anne frames it as a moral line, Charles can't treat it as a domestic disagreement, he has to treat it as a decision of reign. Charles doesn't end Camilla's access with anger, he ends it with procedure. A discreet instruction travels through the private office like a blade wrapped in velvet. Access is suspended. No debate, no soft landing. That's the palace's true power, quiet consequences delivered by calm messengers. And in that moment, the balance shifts in the most humiliating way possible. Camilla isn't confronted in public. She's managed in private. Because the crown doesn't argue, the crown corrects. In this dramatized account, the private office becomes the discipline engine the public never sees. It isn't fueled by emotions. It's fueled by protocol lists, permissions, and silent rules that can erase a person's access without ever raising a voice. 1 minute you are expected in certain spaces. The next, your name is simply not there. A sealed note circulates. Aid-to-aid directives tighten like a noose. An access list is updated with the cold efficiency of someone closing a file. And the terror of it isn't only that it happens, it's how cleanly it happens, like the palace has done this before, like it has rehearsed what to do when family tensions risk spilling into scandal. Charles's motive is framed as duty, not cruelty. Protect the legacy, avoid the headlines, establish boundaries before the institution looks compromised. Because once Anne has framed the collection as a moral line, Charles cannot allow the system to appear negotiable. If he does, it signals weakness, and weakness in the palace is an invitation for chaos. So he chooses the crown's language, calm, procedural, undeniable. Not stop. Not how could you. Just a single administrative truth that becomes impossible to argue with. Access is suspended. It's the kind of correction that doesn't need explanation to hurt, because it is, by design, an announcement of power. Camilla feels it immediately, and it isn't just inconvenience, it's demotion disguised as order. Her reaction moves in stages, almost mechanically. First, disbelief, because the palace rarely uses its machinery against someone at her level. Then controlled anger, the kind that stays behind the eyes because she knows any visible crack becomes a story. And then the survival calculation begins, because she understands the real danger. Suspended doesn't sound temporary. It sounds like a warning shot. It sounds like the start of something larger. And as this happens, Anne's position hardens into something almost untouchable. Her objection isn't treated as family friction. It's treated as credible and urgent. Those two words matter more than any argument, because when the palace labels something urgent, it moves like a machine. It doesn't care who is embarrassed. It cares who is exposed. And in this version of events, people around Camilla begin to shift in ways she can feel, but can't publicly name. Hesitations in tone, careful wording, the sudden reluctance of aides to promise anything at all. The room doesn't have to change physically for Camilla to understand it has changed socially. That's how the palace punishes, by quietly altering the atmosphere until you realize you're standing in a colder world. Then Camilla does what she has always done to survive. She recalculates. She reframes. If access has been cut, she will not let the word cut become the headline. She tries to convert the lockdown into a respectful tribute, something dignified, something noble, something that looks like her choice instead of the institution's correction. She imagines a polished narrative. Out of reverence, she stepped back. Out of respect, she deferred. Out of love, she honored the Queen's privacy. But the palace has already turned the spotlight into a trap, because voluntary is hard to sell when the system has moved this fast. Behind that polished surface, she starts searching for the truth that matters most. Who backed Anne? And how far does that backing go? Because Anne alone is dangerous, but Anne backed by the right voices becomes unstoppable. And in the palace, backing doesn't always look like applause, it looks like silence. Like doors that open for one person and close for another. Like calls that get answered immediately. Like an unspoken agreement that this boundary will not be crossed again. Aid drama erupts quietly, as factions attempt to protect different versions of reality. One side wants swift compliance to bury the story. Another wants cautious resistance to avoid admitting fault. Camilla is trapped in the same brutal dilemma every palace player fears. Comply too fast and you look guilty. Resist too long and you look defiant. Either way, your image is shaped by forces you don't control. And the more she tries to escape the narrative, the more the narrative tightens around her. Because what's at stake isn't just access, it's legitimacy. Then comes the detail that turns strategy into panic. Camilla learns Anne isn't acting on principle alone. There's documentation. A paper trail. Notes, timings, permissions, perhaps even witness statements, proof that transforms this from a clash of personalities into a case file. And once documentation exists, Camilla's options shrink, because she can't charm her way out of ink. Because suspension isn't the end, it's the beginning of an investigation the palace can't stop once it starts. And once documentation exists, this stops being about personalities and becomes about proof. At first, many assume Anne is simply defending tradition. Then the whispers shift. She didn't just object, she documented. A timeline, a witness, a detail that proves this wasn't a harmless misunderstanding. Because access doesn't just mean walking into a room. It means keys, logs, permissions. And once the idea spreads that the Queen's personal collection was approached like a resource instead of a sanctuary, Camilla's situation becomes dangerously bigger than a family conflict. It becomes institutional. In this dramatized version of events, the palace stops sounding like a family and starts sounding like a machine. Controlled access becomes the phrase that changes everything. Inventories, sign-offs, steward permissions. A system built to protect legacy items from casual handling suddenly becomes the battlefield where reputations live or die. And the terrifying part is how ordinary it all looks on paper, small boxes checked, names recorded, times logged. Because that's what makes it lethal. You can argue feelings. You can't argue timestamps. A witness emerges, not as a dramatic whistleblower, but as the kind of quiet professional the palace relies on to keep secrets contained. An archivist, a curator, security, a senior aide who notices a detail that doesn't fit. Maybe a request appears before approval is granted. Maybe instructions are given as if approval is guaranteed. Maybe someone speaks with the confidence of a person who believes the rules bend automatically for them. And once that irregularity is noted, Anne's objection stops being interpreted as stubbornness and starts being interpreted as strategy. She isn't saying, Camilla is wrong. She's saying, protocol was breached. That framing is devastating because it doesn't attack a person, it activates an institution. The timeline becomes the noose. A request made too early. A name placed in the wrong column. A signature missing where one should exist. And in a place like this, a missing signature is not a small error, it's a silent accusation. Staff begin to fear the worst. Not because they love drama, but because they understand what leaks do to the crown. If this story escapes the gates, it doesn't just look like tension, it looks like internal chaos. It looks like contested legacy. It makes the palace appear divided over the late Queen's memory, and that is the one narrative the institution cannot afford. So the private office moves quickly, the way it always does when survival is on the line, schedule a formal meeting, lock it down, control the story before the story controls them. And the detail that truly changes Camilla's fate is simple. Anne is invited. Not consulted from the sidelines. Invited into the decision room. That invitation is a statement, because it confirms Anne's objection has been elevated from complaint to case. It tells everyone watching from the shadows that this is no longer a matter of smoothing feelings. It's about consequences. It's about precedent. And once Anne is invited, she isn't merely objecting, she's judging. The meeting isn't loud. It's worse than loud. It's formal, the kind of formality that strips away excuses and leaves only consequences. Camilla arrives expecting compromise. Anne arrives expecting correction. And the private office arrives expecting order. Every sentence is polite. Every pause is weaponized. Because the real issue isn't a collection, it's the late Queen's legacy and who is allowed to step into it like armor. And in that room, someone makes it brutally clear. The era of taking is over. Camilla's defense is careful, polished, designed to soften the room before it can harden against her. It was authorized, she implies, or it was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, a routine request inflated by nerves. She offers the kind of explanation that sounds reasonable until you place it beside a timeline that refuses to bend. Anne's line is colder, and somehow more merciful because it doesn't pretend. It wasn't malicious, she says, but it was wrong, and wrong matters. That single sentence lands like a verdict because it removes intention from the debate and replaces it with standards. The private office listens like a courtroom. Their goal is not to soothe. Their goal is to contain reputational risk, restore discipline, and prevent precedent. They ask for the paper trail. They weigh the silence between answers. And then, the reveal drops, subtle but brutal. The authorization trail is unclear. Someone acted without permission, or assumed permission, or relied on the idea that certain rules don't apply anymore. The room goes colder. Because if the system can be assumed, then the system is weak, and weakness invites disaster. That's the moment Charles's leadership becomes unavoidable. He doesn't need to raise his voice to change the future. He formalizes restricted access not as punishment, but as protection. A boundary designed to prevent future disputes, future assumptions, future leaks. And Camilla feels the emotional rupture in real time, because she realizes this isn't about today's misunderstanding. It's about tomorrow's rules. It's about how the palace will function from now on, and what her place in that structure will look like when the dust settles. Then comes the ending cliffhanger that makes the air feel heavy even after the meeting ends. A new rule is proposed, and it targets Camilla's access going forward, not just to one collection, to anything tied to the late Queen's private legacy. It's framed as clarification. It reads like containment. And everyone understands what it really is. A line drawn so boldly that it cannot be crossed without a scandal. Because if Anne is invited into the decision room, she's no longer objecting, she's judging. And once rules change, it's not just about this art collection, it's about what Camilla is allowed to touch next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.